Get ready for another episode of The Awake Space. I'm Lori Rivers, your host. And this is where you come for inspiration to help you with your aspirations and get some of the most important astrological information you can find on the internet to make sure you're up to date with the latest going-ons up there, because as above, so below. So, after last week's eclipse sandwich, I think a lot of people are finally feeling some relief. Of course, Mercury went retrograde Saturday. The technical term is Mercury stationed. It's in Gemini. This is actually a great place for it when Mercury is in its sign. It's really easy to tell how things are going to play out. It's pretty straightforward. It's communication straight up. It's transportation straight up. And we're going to need to be revising and reviewing, taking up old projects, taking a look at things we weren't able to get off the ground all the way, or projects that are currently operating and restructuring those. That's what Mercury retrograde is all about. It is not a doom and gloom thing. If you want to know more about how your Mercury actually operates as a receptor of information, because Mercury, it always gets boiled down into fluff. It's people like to say, it's communication, transportation. It's about your ideas. It's about how your mind works. It's about how you perceive your reality around you. And science has proven that we shape our reality through our perceptions, which is why people work really hard to control the narrative, whether it's media or politicians or whatever system is in play. They want people saying the same thing. They want people outraged over the same thing. They want to keep people at odds. Because if you were actually really in charge of your own thinking and self-actualizing in that, 90% of the rhetoric out there you wouldn't buy into. So we're going to see a lot of plot holes in various rhetoric as well. So the moon is in Pisces as I record this. I just finished doing the Patreon horoscopes. And it was a really great time to do it. I actually stayed up to do this because the moon is kissing Jupiter right now in Pisces. So this is a really great moment, even if you're willing to stay up till 3 in the morning, 3:30 a.m. Pacific on June 1st. It was a great time to kind of revel in the air, in the feelings, in the beliefs and the knowings of manifesting those dreams. And that's pretty cool energy. It feels really good. Not gonna lie. I am a little tired, but I work for myself. I can get up later. So, we've got a busy month in June. Besides some of the bigger events, we kick it off with the sun conjunct the lunar node today, June 1st. This is an excellent day for really pitching forth your best effort. Now, we're not going to start new stuff, but you have things already going. Where can you put your energy to those? Okay, so it's also a great time to just have kind of fated encounters, seeing the right thing at the right time, catching the phone at the right moment, making a call at the right time, catching up with people you've been meaning to get with for a while. It's not anything new, but it's stuff where we meant to get to or tried to get around to, but things got in the way. June 2nd, Venus enters Cancer. June 10th, there is the solar eclipse, which is a new moon on steroids. I'll talk about that in the next segment. Mars enters Leo on June 11th. June 14th, Saturn squares Uranus for the second time. I don't think I'm going to talk about that in this episode. We'll leave it for the next one. But it is a date you want to mark on your calendar. June 20th, Jupiter is retrograde. So it popped into Pisces. Now it's going to go backwards again. June 21st, it's the summer solstice. That is when the sun enters Cancer. And June 22nd, Mercury stations direct. It's not quite the big boom of last year's solstice, but this is still a very active climate. We're still looking at massive systemic change at large. And on a personal level, we're looking at how we want to build our lives forward. And you can see that in the big discussions between big businesses kind of reneging on their promise to let people work from home. People saying, hey, we need workers. People aren't willing to work. Well, people are saying, well, I like working from home. Or if you've been in the service industry, you're like, well, I don't want to get paid crappy wages to do a job that has me on my feet all day and less than optimal conditions. So we're actually, speaking of Saturn and Aquarius, we're actually seeing the foundations of a new labor movement building. It'll be really interesting to see how it plays out over the next few years, especially once Pluto hits Aquarius in 2026. That's the meta view. Okay, so as an astrologer, it's always a weird thing because I hold multiple levels of awareness when it comes to astrological events. There's the big meta view, the mundane, the mass consciousness, and then there's, kind of the middle ground of just daily transactional life, and then there's the individual spiritual pursuit. And we could pursue spirituality collectively, but I'm going to argue until people learn how to communicate better and communicate inside themselves and feel more secure in their own beliefs. It makes it harder to work in concert, although we're seeing progress. So, that is the astrological weather report for June. My Mercury retrogrades always go really well because it's where I pick up old projects and I pick up writing I meant to do. And one of those pieces is the Astro Guide on Chiron. I'm going to read a little bit of that to you at the end of the program. So stay tuned and you'll hear a little bit of that Astro Guide. I'm not done with it yet, but it's about halfway. So I expect it to be done, probably by Thursday, which would be June. We're in June. It's June 1st, Tuesday. So June 3rd, the Chiron Astro Guide should be done. Always available to patrons, regardless of your membership level, which is pretty cool. Discord is also available to all my patrons. And it's a growing community. It's getting pretty fun in there. It's looking pretty good. We've got, what else going on? Oh, Coffee with Lori, which happens this Sunday. If you're a patron, don't forget, it happens at 11 o'clock. Now, if you're not a patron and you want to book it, go to wokeastrology.com and book the Coffee with Lori event this coming Sunday. It's a great way to get to ask me questions, get to know me in an informal session, and kind of talk astrology. A lot of people do that before they book a reading just to see, do I really, is she really who she says she is on TikTok? It's always kind of fun. You get me as I am. What can I say? It's Gen X astrology. Anyway, I'm going to move on to my patron thank yous because my patrons are the bestest ever. And I have a huge appreciation. It's even more appreciated now that I left my job. I no longer work in tech, which is good. And so this is what I'm doing full time. So I really, really appreciate all the support. And I'm getting some stuff I wanted to get to and couldn't get done put into the works, which includes the YouTube channel. So that's also on this week's agenda. So without further ado, let me get to those patron thank yous. As always, I owe a huge thank you to my patrons. I love you from the bottom of my heart. I am doing what I have wanted to do since I first really dug into astrology. Teaching and forecasting and working with people to help them get to the very heart of who they are and help them find their own path. Not my path, not somebody else's path, but helping people get on their path, whether it's career or their spiritual journey, understanding their healing process. It's a powerful thing to work with people and help them live their very best lives. And that's what I get to do, in part thanks to you. So patrons, Gianna, thank you. Devin, Litzy, Paige, Michelle, Elwin, which is actually the moderator. Big thanks to her. By the way, Elwin the Witch on TikTok is one of my favorite creators. So big honor to have the moderator be there. Ashley, Tracy, Anna. Let's see. Kara, Catherine, Mattia. Get a few more here. Let's see. We've got... Mattia, I know I just said your name wrong. Might be Mattea. And I've read your chart. I'm sorry. Brianna, Kristen, Marie, Priscilla, Gabriella, Krista, Eileen, and Marissa. Those are my big shout outs. And I look forward to seeing you guys at Coffee with Lori on June 6th. See you there. Be square. So, hey, before we get to Chiron, I want to talk about manifestation because I think the two are inextricably linked. Because if you've ever been on a long healing journey, you know that it's a process, and so is manifesting. It's not just wave a wand or just add water when you're manifesting, just like it isn't like that when you're trying to heal. It's a process, and that's why I write manifestation tips in my astrological forecasts a lot of times on Patreon, because learning how to tune your mind into what it is you want to receive versus what you receive by default or what you've been trained to receive, because most of us are very trained to look for the bad news. Most of us are very trained to look for what's awful. We're trained to go be outraged in some way. And it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. You know, there's a news service for everybody, right? I haven't watched the news on television or radio for years, probably 15. I catch my news by skimming headlines, by watching social media. I go research for myself. I go take a look at things, but I will not watch the television. I'm just not going to. First of all, when I was learning about journalism, broadcast media was not considered actual journalism unless it was a reporter out in the field. But the news desk, they were announcers. They were news announcers. And which meant they had to have good speaking skills and be presentable on camera. But they're reading, you know. They might have written it, you know, too. But regardless, it was very different than print journalism, which were people who went out and found the stories, wrote about the stories, and had to argue with publishers to get them published. So And that was the 1980s. And it's still, I mean, there's various news services who have said in court they're not a reliable source, so, and yet they're still watched. So deciding where you want to tune your attention to makes a big difference in how you manifest things. And just for the record, manifest, the word itself, means to shape with one's hands, which means there's a process involved. Doesn't mean you have to physically make something happen, but inspired action usually helps make things happen, in my experience. And I manifest some amazing things. I've had some amazing saves in my lifetime. I'm sure I have a team of guides saving my butt. I've always met the right people at the right time. I've had right teachers, but that's also where I put my attention. So I kind of have an expectation that a teacher will show up. I may not know where I'm going to meet them. I don't know how I'm going to find them, but they show up. And so the more something happens, the more you can expect it. And things will move more rapidly. So I gave some really good tips because we've got some good energy for as we build towards this solar eclipse coming up June 10th. And I'll talk more about that as we go along, like maybe the next episode. We want to look at the seeds we're planting. It's a great day for manifesting, but understand that it might take a bit to get results. Eclipse energy rings out for 6 months. It rings out for 6 months. So that lunar eclipse, where there's letting go of limiting beliefs, etc., I'm sure you're wrung out, you've released a lot, but you'll see little bits and bobs that need to be cleaned up. Likewise, planting seeds at the solar eclipse, which is the new moon on steroids, is going to bear fruit over time. Now, you may have some very quick manifestations with it. It's a very powerful event. But that's only if you're tuning your tuner now. If you're looking at all the things that make you mad, cause you pain, make you feel like you're struggling, keep that whatever narratives and limiting beliefs going on in your head, then you're not going to be able to ride the cosmic wave to your advantage when it comes to the solar eclipse. So if you're not a Patreon, go check out the description for the podcast. There's links there, and you can go be a patron. It's for the $11 and up. Get the astrology forecasts and the manifestation tips. Other than that, why don't we move on to Chiron, who's the wounded healer. Focus on the healing. And I'm very well acquainted with Chiron. It was a wonderful light on the path to healing from very serious diagnosis from trauma-induced or abuse-induced trauma. And I got to 0 clinical markers. It was something that was considered impossible when I was young. I didn't buy into that all the way. But I neither teach my method to anybody else because there's no verifiability that it'll work for anybody else. I took a lot of modalities and did a lot of different things to get there. If anything, it was grit and determination, which is also something your Chiron will show you in your own chart, is your healing path. So, hope you enjoy it. The full thing should be done by the end of the week, and I will have it up on Patreon before I release it into the wild. Thank you so much for being on this journey with me. So, let's talk about Chiron for a minute. I'm not going to read the introduction to this. You can read it yourself. I'll read down the page a little bit. But what I want you to understand is we discovered Chiron in 1977. Applying Greek mythology to something the Greeks did not discover was erroneous. And I will argue the same for Pluto. But we'll talk about Pluto later when I get to it. It does not mean this does not have influence. In fact, Chiron and studying Chiron was a major part of putting me on my own healing pathway. But we cannot treat it like a personal planet. First of all, Chiron is it's a refugee of the Kuiper Belt, and it lives between Saturn and Uranus. That means it's a tertiary body, okay? It's not a personal planet. It represents a mini generation. It takes, or a micro generation, because it takes 4.16 on average years to move through a sign, okay? Sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. It's got about a 50-year orbit, okay? So you have your first Chiron return at 50, or 51, and if you live to be 100, you have your next one. It's nothing to fear. I just completed mine. When I was a young astrologer, I looked out at that and thought, oh my God, what's gonna happen? And it was actually pretty awesome, not gonna lie. So it's important to understand what Chiron is. And so using the story of Chiron, the centaur, is only somewhat applicable, okay? He was very wise. He was a good teacher. He had a mortal wound, and he was immortal. And yet he still gave himself up to allow Prometheus to have immortality. And Prometheus gave humanity fire. He was that wise of a centaur. So it's not about self-sacrifice. I mean, he was obviously in agony. But we can give up to our own inner light. That's our healing pathway. And Chiron lights that up in our chart. I know everybody focuses on the wound, but wound identification is the first step. It is not the totality of the healing process. So that's really important to remember. So the 20th century astrologers were trying to I talked about this in the previous section, but just to recap, they were trying to legitimize astrology. And so they weren't taking into account all of the astrological knowledge we have, which includes mundane astrology and predictive astrology, which is complex and it's its own thing. We read natal charts in one way, we read mundane another. They have their own rules. And just like any modality, you follow the rules of the modality for accuracy. But in their quest to be legitimized, because they were mostly Pluto and Leo generation, they wanted to be seen as valid. They kind of they over asserted a few things with limited understanding, and you can't have a definitive answer about Chiron, I would say, until astrologers have observed it for more than one orbital cycle. I would say it's going to take 3 or 4 and see how it plays out. We have thousands of years of data on the personal planets or celestial bodies. We know the sun and moon aren't planets, it's shorthand. They're called luminaries. And then the tertiary planets. These are all things humans could see with the naked eye before light pollution and space junk. So those bodies have thousands of years of observation, correlation, and study. The more modern planets from Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Chiron, these are newer. We've got a pretty good handle on Uranus. Neptune, we've got a pretty good handle on. Pluto, I think the jury's still out. And I'll be putting my thoughts and observations into book form, Probably not in 2021, but we'll see what happens with that. So I'm going to read from the section called Moving the Narrative Forward. Just as our understanding of the human brain has advanced thanks to more refined technology and in-depth scientific study, so too has our understanding of the human psyche and our ability to heal. That is because of neuroplasticity, the ability to form new neural pathways. Until the mid-2000s, it was thought that you were stuck with the brain cells you were born with, which meant if you suffered trauma, either physically, emotionally, or psychologically, you were doomed to be forever wounded. Our understanding has greatly changed when it comes to healing, and as a young astrologer, I was busy researching pathways to healing. I had complex PTSD and a variety of other trauma-induced disorders, incurred through severe childhood trauma compounded into early adulthood. I believed firmly that we didn't know enough about the brain in the 1980s and 90s to give such a doom-fated determination of a person's life. And if I couldn't heal, life wasn't going to be worth living. Coping through the nightmares and quagmire of that reality gave me no hope. Psychology at the time gave me no hope. My only pathway to healing was through research and discovery. It took decades of research in a variety of fields to find the answer to unlocking my own healing. And just as I was making massive inroads through a healing method I created for myself, neuroscience was proving my theories out in a myriad of studies. Divine timing at its finest. Healing is more than possible, and Chiron is a light on the path to gaining wellness. I cleared 0 clinical markers, side note. It is with great respect to the early interpreters of Chiron, who were amazing astrologers, that my correction to the meanings and interpretations come. Having interacted with many of them in professional forums in the late 90s and early 2000s, I know they were true scholars willing to see ideas amended as new facts and information come to light. All professional astrologers acknowledge the scientific method, for we of all people know that our beloved astrology birthed science many thousands of years ago. As you continue your astrological study, it's important to move from accepting the interpretations of others to trusting your own observations, both natal placements and how they express energetically, as well as the transits for mass consciousness and individuals. That includes the writing in these guides. Never take what is written as gospel. It's a guide to help you find your own understanding, a light for your pathway to self-understanding. Who knows, maybe you'll offer a new insight that further advances our understanding of what it is to be human experiencing life here on planet Earth. So question everything, including what I write. And I'm open. Somebody figures out more than me. Oh my gosh, that's always cool. So here's a little bit more about Chiron itself. As with all celestial bodies, natal placements are interpreted differently than their transiting counterparts. Your natal chart is a slice of time and space representing the crystallized form you. Natal chart placements are the ingredients in the makeup of who you are. House placement, sign, and relationships they make to significant angles, the ascendant, descendant, IC and MC, and other placements, aspects, show how the energy interplays in your personal makeup. Understanding that Chiron plays a tertiary role since it orbits in between Saturn and Uranus is very important. It does not bear the weight of a personal planet. The personal planets, called so as shorthand, Sun and Moon are technically luminaries, are the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. Sorry, contact lens issues. Tertiary planets are Jupiter and Saturn. We can add Chiron to the list of tertiary planets since it has now been well observed by many professional researching astrologers, though it plays a more diminished role to Jupiter and Saturn, bona fide planets. In the natal chart, tertiary planets denote social and cultural programming, family patterns, and attitudes adopted into our personality. These can be changed over time with experience, and I will add discipline. Tertiary planets represent a kind of micro-generation. They have longer transits, Jupiter spending 1 year per sign, Saturn spending 2.5 years, and Chiron spends approximately 4.16 years per sign. Chiron represents a deep wounding that only you can heal. It's not the only signifier of trauma. In fact, in my experience, it actually shows the impact of how the trauma impacts you versus signifying the actual traumatic events. So it's your perceptions. As described in the introduction, when Chiron was discovered in 1977, neuroscience was in its infancy, and we did not have the technology we do to study the brain and its ability to heal from both organic trauma, aneurysm, stroke, TIA, tumors, and other head wounds, as well as imposed trauma from emotional, psychological, and physical abuse. Chiron represents the how the initial wound was perceived by the individual, not the actual wound or abuse. The placement of Chiron on its own is not how we identify the cause. However, it is how we identify the healing path. And I'm going to leave you with that. I'm still working on this. I'll be going through Chiron, through the houses and signs. Right now, Chiron is transiting Aries, and in a natal chart that indicates an identity wound, and the house shows where that manifests. And just in case you were wondering, in my case, it was in creative self-expression. It was the fifth house. Having children was instrumental in my healing process. I had them because I wanted them. I wanted to love somebody more than I could imagine, and in a healthy way, and be a good parent. And that was helpful in my own healing process to recognize things, not only in identifying where things had happened, but in learning that if I nurtured myself as I nurtured my children, there was a great amount of healing. The other thing is performance, not holding back, knowing value and worth, not fearing rejection. And all of that was a very long process. There's way more to Chiron that I'm writing about, and I'm looking forward to getting this done so I can get it to you, because to me, Chiron is just such a beautiful light on a path. I mean, we all have a wound from our perceptions, of the world and how trauma has impacted our perceptions. And I don't think there's a person alive who hasn't experienced some kind of trauma, because trauma is perceptual. And different people can have the same thing happen and come out of it differently because of how we perceive what's going on. It doesn't make it not real. Okay. But in fact, it should be liberating to know that if it's perceptual, it means when you shift your perceptions, you shift how you see the world, and the world then changes. And to me, that was one of the biggest epiphanies and one of the best helps on my road to zero clinical markers. Do I have all the answers? No, but I can give you all of my observations, and then you can make your own. And that's always my goal as a consulting astrologer and certified coach. I don't have all the answers, but I can give you my observations, and I can help ask you questions to help you on your journey to gain clarity and confidence and support on your road. So if you want to know more, make sure you're a patron. You can go to the link in my bio. If you want a reading, make sure you go to wokeastrology.com. I have openings through June and July, and I look forward to speaking with you soon. We'll talk more about that solar eclipse coming up in the next episode.